The Fox City SCORE chapter and WHBY are pleased to bring you Biz Talk, a chance for you to hear from entrepreneurs and professionals as they share their experiences from starting to sustaining growth. Learn the skills needed for your business to be successful. If you missed anything, you can catch the Biz Talk podcast at biztalkwithscore.com. And now from the Myron Construction Studio, it's Biz Talk on WHBY.
Good Saturday morning to everybody, and welcome to Biz Talk with SCORE. We will talk more about the SCORE chapter later in the show, but we're going to get right to it now. And first, I want to introduce our guest host this week. Joining me is Kathleen Wall, chapter chair of the Fox City SCORE chapter. Welcome, Kathleen.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for an opportunity to share our experiences with entrepreneurs and small business development.
Thank you for being on the show too, Kathleen. Well, our guests this week are Ryan Kauth from the Wisconsin Center for Employee Ownership and Matt Middendorp from ESOP Partners. So Ryan, let's start with you. Can you tell us and our listeners a little bit about your background and where you got to where you are today?
Yeah, thanks, Terry and Kathleen, for having me on today. My name's Ryan Kauth. I'm the executive director of the Wisconsin Center for Employee Ownership, or if you want to use our acronym, WICEO or Wisconsin CEO. We do two things. We help educate business owners and economic development professionals about employee ownership as succession plans for their companies. And then we also provide technical assistance to those business owners who are going through the employee ownership transaction or conversion process. And you can also start employee-owned companies. So we also help with that. My background is in small business consulting, as well as small business coaching. I do coaching for family businesses. And as you can imagine, a lot of that has to do with their ownership transitions and what they're going to do with their businesses, essentially when they are done with them. I also have community bank, business lending background and have spent several years teaching entrepreneurship and small business management classes at universities and colleges.
Okay. And Matt, let's turn to you about you and your background and how you ended up joining ESOP Partners.
Sure. First off, I have to say thank you very much, Terry, for having me and Kathleen for allowing me to be here. Gotta say this is a heck of a panel because you've got two people between Ryan and I who are very, very passionate about educating around ESOP. Employee ownership is a fantastic tool for business owners looking to be in control of their business transition. As somebody who is a former banker and former bank leader, I've seen a lot of companies go through this transition, and it means a lot to the employees. It means a lot to the communities when it happens. So, former bank leader, my background also is an entrepreneur. I was a business owner for 10 years, traveling all over the country and helping businesses be successful to grow a lot like what Ryan did, and exited that business in 2023 and joined ESOP Partners. So now my job is to, simplify ESOPs for business owners all across the country to maximize the opportunity that they see in an employee-owned business. And to do that, I educate. So simplify, maximize, and educate is the theme that ESOP Partners lives by. Again, it's a powerful tool for the right people, and I can't wait to talk more about it today and hopefully shed some light for some really interested parties.
Excellent. So, Ryan, let's turn to you for a bit here and talk about the Wisconsin Center for Employee Ownership. Could you first tell us about what the purpose of the Wisconsin Center for Employee Ownership is?
Yeah, the background of the Wisconsin Center for Employee Ownership is like several other state employee ownership centers throughout the country. About half the states have state centers that do what we do, which again is providing education and technical assistance having to do with employee ownership, transactions, conversions, and starts. That includes ESOPs, worker cooperatives, and a newer form of employee ownership called employee ownership trusts. So with the Wisconsin CEO was funded by a capacity building grant from the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. And those funds were matched by donors to an organization, a national organization called the Employee Ownership Expansion Network, or EOX. And so the Wisconsin Center for Employee Ownership is about 2 years old. I was hired as the executive director toward the very end of last year. So again, we're a newer organization in the state. But state centers have been around for a long time. Most of the ones that have been around a long time, 30 years-ish, started at universities like Rutgers and Kent State. And over the last several years, EOX has found ways to fund and staff state centers throughout the country. And again, their goal is to put one in every state, because what they found from research by the National Center for Employee Ownership is that there are more employee ownership company starts, transactions and conversions in states that have state centers. So in other words, it's important to have somebody with, say, boots on the ground in the state as a person who can educate business owners on employee ownership. The sad part is, in national surveys, only about 10% of business owners know about employee ownership as a business succession or transition option. So, like Matt, our goal is to increase that in our state.
Okay. And in the third segment, we're going to talk a lot more about ESOPs. So I want to cover a little bit more about some of the other areas you cover. So first of all, co-ops. Now, I grew up in Canada and lived in England for a while, so I have a lot of experience with co-ops, but I haven't seen many in the U.S. One, could you explain what co-ops are, and is it an area that's growing within the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, worker cooperatives are the ones that we primarily focus on. There's a number of other types of cooperatives, like purchasing cooperatives and producer cooperatives, but we focus on worker cooperatives because they're the true employee-owned cooperatives. Most people might know a cooperative because they're part of one for fuel or food or something like that. But there are about 30, give or take, worker cooperatives in Wisconsin. Most of them are in either very urban or very rural areas. There are approximately 15 communities in Wisconsin that have one. Most of them are in Madison, Milwaukee, and then the other ones kind of are a smattering about the state. And the interesting thing about worker cooperatives is they truly are democratically run and owned by the employees, and the employees are actually paid based on their labor input with that employee ownership benefit. The other thing about worker cooperatives is there are several tenets that a worker cooperative is built upon. And one of those is working with other worker cooperatives. So in the Madison area, there is a group or a cooperative network, and they work with each other and help each other. And so that's kind of a mantra or one of the 7 tenets of the work.
Okay. And then you mentioned employee trusts. Could you explain more about that? I don't think I've ever heard of them.
Yeah, it's a newer one to the U.S. And actually, since you spent some time in England, the employee ownership trust is actually the predominant employee ownership structure in the U.K. The one that started it all back in the 1800s in the U.K. now has 80,000 employees globally. So employee ownership trusts are purpose trusts where the trust, the beneficiaries are the employees. You can start an employee ownership trust, but typically you are converting into an employee ownership trust for a business transition purpose. The nice thing about employee ownership trusts is there's a trust deed and there are bylaws, and that basically runs the company. There's a lot of flexibility in that. Many employee ownership trusts where the business owner sells to the trust and then the trust holds the assets of the company for as the beneficiary for the employees. There's profit sharing models built in and things like that. Typically, that selling business owner sticks around as the CEO of that company until a new CEO can run that company. I think they're really good. There aren't any in Wisconsin yet, but I think there's a real good application for these in, very rural and very urban areas. Just like all the employee ownership forms, the basic three that I talked about. If you have good employees in a profitable company, an employee ownership trust can be formed with just a handful of employees. So you don't need that many in order to do that.
Okay. And as you look at, in your time with WICEO, as you look at the firms that are coming in and people that are coming in to talk to you, are they primarily interested in ESOPs, or are they open to all the different alternatives?
So I've been getting mostly folks who are interested in exploring ESOPs and exploring worker cooperatives or starting a worker cooperative. The employee ownership trust model is not very well known. I talk about that in presentations and with those who I talk to, who I might get referred to, or it might come in through our website, for example. But it's pretty even. And most of them are exploring it for a business transition that's not necessarily happening now, but several years down the road. And that's great, because you should take several years to transition your business. But once in a while, I do get one where, for example, there was a business unit of a company that was going to be sold, and they wanted information on how they could actually get some financing, and rather than be sold, they could form a ESOP and essentially buy that business unit and stay in that community.
Okay. And as you look across all the different possibilities for ownership that you can help with the ESOPs, the trusts, and the co-ops, where do you see the most potential for the future? So is it still going to be primarily ESOPs, or do you see that co-ops and trusts will grow more?
That's a great question. So that Wisconsin's pretty heavy in manufacturing, and right now, of the approximately 200 ESOPs in Wisconsin, 1/3 of them are manufacturing companies. And a lot of those manufacturing companies have owners that are mid-50s or older. So I see a lot of potential for manufacturing companies. And then probably second, if I had to pick another industry, it might be tied between construction companies and professional service providers like veterinarian services. There are some industries right now that are very attractive to private equity. And nothing wrong with private equity, but typically speaking, if your company is purchased by private equity, within the first 3 years, one of two things are going to happen. One is they're going to move your company, or two, they're going to reduce jobs. One of those two things almost always happens within 3 years of a private equity company buying a company. And so there are some veterinary offices that don't want that to happen. And so rather than having them bought by private equity, they're converting their practices to worker cooperatives.
Okay. Well, we are at the perfect spot for our first break. You're listening to Biz Talk with SCORE on WHBY, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Biz Talk with SCORE. Thanks for being here with us this morning. This week's guests are Ryan Kauth from the Wisconsin Center for Employee Ownership and Matt Middendorp from ESOP Partners. Today we're talking about the Wisconsin Center for Employee Ownership and more specifically employee share ownership programs. Before we continue our conversation with Ryan and Matt, I have a couple questions for you. Do you want to start a business but don't know how? Do you want to improve or grow a current business? Do you have more questions about your business than time? A small business mentor from SCORE Fox Cities could be exactly what you need. SCORE is a national organization with over 200 chapters and is affiliated with the Small Business Administration. Your local Fox Cities chapter supports the 8-county area from Appleton to Fond du Lac and Wapaka to Montello. We have 35 volunteer members, each an expert in their field, offering entrepreneurs no cost and confidential mentoring in most aspects of business. You can learn more about the Fox Cities SCORE chapter by visiting our website at score.org/Fox Cities. There you'll find the resources that can help your business thrive and survive and grow. The website also has webinars to help you learn from home. And remember, SCORE is a volunteer organization, and our experts do not charge for providing mentoring in all aspects of running a business. Fox City SCORE is always looking for new mentors. Think about how much you have learned in your career and how helpful it would be to have had somebody with that experience mentoring you when you started out. If you want to pass that knowledge forward and want to make a difference in the community, go to that website again, score.org/Fox Cities, click on the volunteer button and fill out the short application. And also be sure to visit us at our website, biztalkwithscore.com. Now back to the show. So before we get back into the discussion itself, we're going to have Kathleen step in and ask a question here and get started. So Kathleen?
Well, I want to give a little background on my question. And the question is, I'm a baby boomer, and I know that approximately 40% of small businesses are owned by baby boomers right now. And the end of our generation turns 60 in the year 2025, which means, this is the lead-in, which means that there's going to be an awful lot of businesses transitioning ownerships because of the influence of the baby boomers aging. So tell us, please, what are some of the issues that are going to be arising because of that large volume of transitioning of businesses?
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. You're describing what we call the silver tsunami, where we think there's going to be a lot of missed opportunities, good businesses, valuable businesses with employees in their communities that are going to close because there are no owners or buyers for those particular companies. And so that's why we say, rather than looking at a employee in your company or your leadership team in your company who maybe can't get the financing, or a customer or a supplier or a competitor that you met at an industry association, why don't you look first at all of your employees as your business succession transition? Matt, what do you think?
No, I think so many of the businesses in our communities here in Wisconsin, they have their name on the football field scoreboard. They have it up in the gym in the high school. The people that have worked for them, they recognize and they appreciate how hard they work to contribute to the success of that company. That I think you're absolutely right, Ryan. If I was going to take control of my business transition and continue the legacy that I built, I would definitely start with employee ownership.
And a few years ago, we did a series on selling your small business and had a number of guests come on. And some of the factoids they gave us were pretty amazing, that 80% of small businesses shut down when the owner retires because they either haven't set their business up to sell, which we won't go into the details of that right now, but they haven't really planned through how to sell. So if you want to have your legacy live on, maybe get a small profit out of selling the business, you really need to be doing some planning in advance. And Ryan, you mentioned earlier that you like to see people come in a year or two before. Is that the right timing, or should it be even earlier than that to think about how you're going to exit your business?
Yeah, typically when I'm presenting, I say 5 years. And one of the reasons for that is if you're not selling to your employees and you decide to sell to another or do a different exit strategy, what happens if it doesn't work, right? So there's also a factoid that says over 50% of mergers and acquisitions fail. So chances are your first shot is not going to work. So that's why it's important for myself and people like Matt, who is a referral partner of ours. And I think the cool thing about ESOP Partners is, one, they're in Appleton. They've been around a long time. And they're an actual ESOP themselves. So not only are they advisors, they also are ESOPs. So they kind of live and breathe it.
Well, shoot, Ryan, now I owe you lunch. Thanks a lot, buddy. Appreciate that.
So what you're selling and providing to organizations is really a critical aspect of an exit plan.
Yeah, and I think what Matt said before is he used the word control a couple times. And if you think about it, when you sell your business, you will, it's really the seller that pulls back from that acquisition. They're the ones that often call it off. And one of the reasons that happens is, one, they don't know what they're exiting to. They really don't. And then two is they're getting this feeling that, what this buyer said, I'm not sure that's actually how it's going to happen. And like Matt said, it's a legacy thing. You've got your name in the community. You care about your employees. You want that company to stay in your community. Honestly, the best way to do it is sell it to your employees.
Well, Ryan, and it's funny you say that because I've talked to a lot of business owners and I say, if somebody had come to you and said, there's a way to sell your business where you stay in control, where you can get the return you're looking for, and you're going to go through that transaction in a way that is collaborative, not confrontational, is that not where you'd start?
Yeah.
And that's employee ownership. That's a transition into employee ownership in a nutshell right there.
It is.
And that will be a perfect transition to our third segment. We're at the right spot for a break. You're listening to Biz Talk with Score on WHBY, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Biz Talk with Score. We'll continue our conversation with Ryan Matt in a minute, but I just wanted to give you an update on some education opportunities. A couple things I want to mention. First, we have our women's conference coming up in September. It's called Accelerate Your Business for Women 2024. All the Wisconsin Score chapters have gotten together and are going to be presenting a full day of educational networking opportunities. It's at the Kalahari Conference Center in Wisconsin Dells, and it's on September 30th, all-day event again. And you can go to score.org/Fox Cities to register. It's right on the front page. Just hit the button and go register. And I just wanted to mention a webinar that we have out there too. Again, if you go to score.org/Fox Cities, at the top of the page, you'll see a tab for workshops and events. You click on that button and it takes you to some of the ones coming up. And there's one that I think is important that I wanted to mention. It's a live online webinar coming up, and it's called Protecting Your Small to Medium-Sized Business. And it's effectively aimed at anybody who's selling online, whatever your business is. And this is really important because we keep hearing lots of issues with technology and opportunities for fraud and getting hacked and the cost of it. And it's a real important thing for small businesses to understand how they protect themselves from fraud and how they find the right partners and the questions they should be asking. So this, again, is an opportunity. It's a live event on July 30th. It's 1 hour in the afternoon. There's no cost, but go to score.org/Fox Cities, click on workshops and events, and you'll see the webinar, Protecting Your Small and Medium-Sized Business. So strongly recommend that. So we're going to get back to the show with Ryan and Matt, and Kathleen, we'll turn it over to you.
What is an ESOP? Tell me more about the details behind employee stock ownership programs?
Well, Ryan might have a definition, but if you don't mind, I would like to share ours. And Brian, I'd definitely jump in and expand on this. An ESOP, very clearly defined as far as we see it, is a qualified retirement plan that business owners use as a transition tool to create an employee ownership vehicle. No, there's a lot to unpack there. So definitely, Ryan, if you want to add some detail to that, but it's a qualified retirement plan. It's a business transition tool and is used as an employee ownership vehicle. Ryan, how do you guys talk about that?
That's how we start out talking about ESOPs. And I think we then kind of go more into the benefits of that. And when I'm talking, there's sometimes, you can tell in the audience when they're not necessarily buying into what you're talking about. And I think some of that has to do with the understanding or misunderstanding that ESOPs are so complex, right? Matt, you do a really good job of explaining, to a business owner how not complex ESOP transaction is.
And I think that's because you have to know, you have to listen, right? You have to have conversations with the business owner and really understand what their goals are, but also understanding that the first step of becoming an ESOP isn't choosing ESOP, right? It's just, I call it the I think I want to phase, right? The I think I want to learn about ESOP, and talking to people like you, talking to people like me, gathering information, just educating yourself about employee ownership and understanding what each of those three pieces means. What does it mean that it's a qualified retirement plan? What does it mean as a transition tool, like we talked about at length? And what does it mean when you're creating an employee ownership owned company? And having those conversations that are at no cost with us, having those conversations with you and just gathering information is a great place to start for a lot of people to understand just how not complex this really is.
So we talked earlier about really starting this 5 years out is kind of the best solution, and great opportunity for boomers and others to transition their businesses. But once you start having that conversation, what's the first step in putting together an approach to an ESOP?
Well, I can tell you the first step that we take, like I said, it's about creating clarity and confidence around what employee ownership is and learning about their business and trying to decide, does employee ownership meet their goals? As a business owner, for example, some rough guidelines, if you're thinking about becoming an ESOP, typically we recommend that you have 15 to 20 employees. Now you can do it with less. That's a guideline, but not a rule, but a minimum of 15 to 20 employees. And the other truth is the same rules that apply to any business that's trying to sell apply to selling an employee-owned business. You have to be profitable, right? You have to have a time frame in mind, and we want to make sure that all those things line up to be employee-owned. 15 to 20 employees and profitability is a great place to start that conversation, and we can fill in the gaps from there.
So the first thing that stands out to me is during this conversation is do not do this on your own. This is something you get help with because that immediately reduces complexity. But the second thing is that when you mentioned retirement plans, and I don't think that many people know that. Could you explain a little bit more about how a stock ownership plan is also a retirement plan?
Absolutely. So an employee stock ownership plan is governed under what's called ERISA law. And Ryan, please jump in here and fill in some gaps, right? So this was established back in the early 70s. And, ESOPs have undergone a lot of evolutions over the years. So when we talk about ESOP as a qualified retirement plan, that's probably one of the first things that you need to know is this is a wealth building tool for the employees of a business that is employee owned. Now, what does that mean? Just an example. I work with a client. It's an excavation company down in Kansas City. And the owner of this company recognized that the people that work for him just physically can't do their job. They start to break down in the construction industry in their late 40s to mid 50s, right? You can't climb on a roof forever. You can't balance on the beams forever, right? So he said, you know what? I want to have an opportunity for these employees to have wealth that they would not have had if it wasn't for being employee owned. And for some of these businesses, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars or more that are going to these employees over time, into this qualified retirement plan. And the awesome part about ESOP is, unlike a 401k, which is another form of retirement plan, right? An employee owned business, ESOP, the employees don't have to put their own money into it. They're not contributing financially to the ESOP to get the benefit later. They're contributing their time and their talent and their expertise to the growth and the profitability of the company. And oftentimes in an ESOP, they do that at a higher level, but they're not putting their own cash in to get these benefits later. So
talk about that a little more, because it'll explain a lot about ESOPs. So one, where is the money coming from to pay the owner? And two, how does that impact so the employees aren't paying anything?
Okay. So one of the really awesome parts about ESOP is, just to give you an example, if you're an S corporation and you're 100% ESOP, the company, those distributions that you're paying to the owners on the K1, now go to the ESOP. And what does that mean? It means that there are no more state or federal taxes being paid. So if the company, through those distributions, is no longer paying state or federal taxes, that money stays in the company then. And what happens most often is that tax saving is used to pay the owner and the costs, right? It may be, I'm just going to be transparent. One of the negatives of going to an ESOP is most of the time the owner doesn't get paid right away, right? They get paid over time, in some form or another. But the company can afford to do that because of those tax savings. So if you're wondering how an owner gets paid, the company no longer pays state or federal taxes, and that money generally is paid out to the owner over time, typically 5 to 7 to 10 years, depending on the company.
Okay. And so as an employee, I own a share of this ESOP. How do I exit? Do I just decide at some point I want to sell, or is there a selling point where you have to exit the ESOP?
So like any qualified retirement plan, it's subject to the rules, meaning retirement age, right? Otherwise you pay penalties for taking money out of it. But there's also vesting periods, just like any other retirement plan. So if you have a 6-year vesting period, you don't get access to that money until you're in for 6 years. And if you withdraw it before retirement age, you pay a penalty for doing that. So it is meant to be a retirement plan for the employees. I don't know, Ryan, do you have anything you want to toss in about the distribution piece?
I mean, I think, for the sake of the show, do know that, if there's the retirement piece, but then there's also, in that retirement plan, you own shares of the company. And so if you would leave that company, you get paid out those shares.
So if you've left before retirement age, you'll be paid out the shares. You'll have to pay the taxes on that. Okay.
Yep. That's
all
the
right.
short version. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about, there's been a couple of instances recently or in the past few years, where ESOPs have run into trouble and employees have had hits to their retirement accounts. Let's first talk about whether the ESOP was itself, the structure itself was responsible for that. And two, how do companies make sure they avoid some of those issues?
Ryan, you probably have better stories about this than I do. Do you want to start with this one?
Yeah. I mean, I think rather than tell a story, I think the idea here is the company wasn't doing well for some reason. And typically it's not because it is an ESOP by structure, but there was something going on, with the company itself. Most ESOPs not only have the retirement plan with the employee ownership shares, but they also have a 401k. And so it's not the only retirement account that the employees have.
Okay.
Yep. Well, and the other thing I would add to that too is, the National Center for Employee Ownership has done some research, and they actually show that ESOP companies tend to grow at 2.3 to 2.5% faster than non-ESOP companies. They're less likely to lay people off than non-ESOP companies. Like Ryan said, they're more likely to have a 401k. They see a bump in productivity in the first year, of about like 3 to 4%. So they're hiring better talent. They're keeping the talent longer. They're more productive. They're getting a better return on assets and growing faster than non-ESOP companies. So, you're absolutely right, Ryan, that if they are having an issue, it's usually not because they're an ESOP. It's some other internal structural or economic impact that's forcing it.
And the other thing that stands out to me as you talk is that because the employee isn't paying for the shares, they haven't invested their retirement money in it. It is retirement opportunity, but it's incremental. And it's really incumbent on the company to do a lot of education on retirement planning and making sure people are taking advantage of 401ks and other retirement opportunities. And they think of the ESOP as incremental to those things.
Well, and the other thing to consider too is even inside of the ESOP, there are rules that allow them to diversify that investment from the ESOP to outside after they meet certain requirements. So they don't have to put all of their eggs in that basket either.
Okay.
So,
Right.
Or keep all their eggs in that basket, I should say.
Yeah, and I think, Terry, you bring up a good point too, is, ESOPs have a particular culture. Employee-owned companies have a particular culture, and that culture is really based on education. There's a reason why some of the statistics that Matt was talking about are the reality. And a lot of that is based on personal finance education that's provided as part of the culture of that employee-owned company.
Brian, you hit a word that really made me pay attention, and that was the culture of the company. So I'm an owner, and I'm thinking about doing an ESOP. What advice would you give to an owner about how do you balance the transparency of what you're thinking of doing, because it involves all your employees, versus how much do you keep confidential and close to your vest before you start exposing what your plans are to your employee base?
Yeah, I mean, that's really up to the individual owner seller. And when you go through that initial process and you go through that study, which is a great thing to have for your business anyway, and you typically don't get a study like that if you're selling your business to a non-employee ownership exit strategy. It's really about this thing called, ownership culture, right? Most business owners would say, yeah, I would love it if my employees, kind of had this ownership mentality. I'm like, well, let's be honest, they don't own it right now. But if they did, they would have an ownership mentality because now they own the company.
And so over time, the original owner gets paid off. I'm assuming the employee owners start to see higher distributions over time as well then.
Absolutely. And, don't underestimate the excitement in the room when you announce that you're employee owned. So just a really quick story about a transition that we were a part of. The owner brought all of his employees together, and everybody's in the room. There's two of us standing up front in our suits, and we're there to actually do education. We're there to talk about ESOP and tell them what this is, because the last thing you want them to do is go to Google to get information about what is this ESOP thing, right? And then suddenly they're Googling, and that always works, right? So we're up in front of the room, and the owner says to everybody, hey, we just sold the business. I wanted you to know that we have new owners of this business. And of course, every set of eyes in the room turns and looks at us standing up front thinking, who are these guys? Right? Well, then he says, okay, do me a favor. Everybody reach under your chair. There's an envelope under there, and open that up. And they pull out this envelope. They open it up, and inside is a mirror. And he announces, everybody, I just sold this company to you. You, the employees, are the owners of this business. And these two guys up here are going to explain what that means and how it's going to change your life. It's a pretty neat moment. I still get the hair still stands up in the back of my neck every time I tell that story.
Okay. That's a great story, and very happy you guys came on to tell us more about employee stock ownership program. We've got one more segment left, but we're at the right time for our last break. You're listening to Biz Talk or Score on WHBI, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. I would like to thank the sponsors and donors who bring Biz Talk with Score to you each weekend. We couldn't present Biz Talk without their generous support. Thank you to Hailing & Associates. Hailing & Associates helps small businesses and individuals not just prepare tax returns, but plan for taxes, thereby helping you minimize taxes for this year and beyond. Hailing & Associates, personal connection, positive results. A special thank you to the Business News for promoting our program in the biweekly business newspaper serving Northeast Wisconsin. If you aren't already subscribing to the Business News, you should. The paper is delivered biweekly and contains relevant and useful information about the business community in Northeast Wisconsin. And finally, we would also like to recognize the David L. and Rita E. Nelson Fund within the Community Foundation for the Fox Valley region for their generous donation of support for Biz Talk and Fox City Score. So turn back to Ryan and Matt. Ryan, first, could you let people know how they can contact WICEO?
Yeah, you can contact WICEO by going to our website, which is WICEO.org. There's lots of employee ownership 101 education there, as well as education on those 3 ownership forms. My calendar's on there, and my contact information is there as well.
And Matt, how about ESOP Partners?
You can actually learn more about ESOP, just like at the WICEO, at ESOPpartners.com. Again, a lot of really great educational resources. If you don't mind, I also want to give my direct phone number. If somebody has a question they're dying to ask, you can reach me at 920-750-6521.
Okay. So as we wrap up the show, we talked a lot about employee stock ownership programs. Matt, how would you tell somebody in kind of an elevator speech what the value of an ESOP is?
I would say the value to you can really be answered by asking yourself 3 questions. Number 1, do you want to stay in control of your business transition? That's really important, that you maintain control when you're selling to an ESOP. Number 2, do you want to maximize your return, right? Do you want to make sure that you are getting the most you can from this asset that you've built over the years? And then number 3, how important is legacy? How important is your name on the building and what you've left behind? And do you want to preserve that? If you can answer yes to all 3 of those questions, then you should definitely be researching and having conversations with me or with Ryan about employee ownership.
Okay. And Ryan, as you look at your time with WICEO, what have you learned that's convinced you even more that whether it's a co-op, a trust, or an ESOP is the right approach for owners?
There's no other exit strategy that has all the benefits that employee ownership does with all, compared to all the other exit strategies that you should choose. The challenge is, and I'm glad there's a challenge. I have a job because there's this challenge. The challenge is this is the least known exit strategy out there. And typically people learn about employee ownership from others who have gone through it. What I want to do, and I know what Matt wants to do, is we want to go throughout Wisconsin and make sure that employee ownership is an exit strategy that every business owner knows, regardless of whether they know another business owner who has used that exit strategy or not.
Okay. Perfect. This has been a really illuminating educational episode for me and our listeners too. The idea that an owner can sell his business to the employees without the employees paying for it directly, and at the same time continue to manage that business until the transition occurs is something that really should be food for thought for people as they're looking at how they exit their business. We've done a lot of episodes on transitions over the last few years, and this was another one that was just great to hear more about and learn about. So we really thank you, Ryan and Matt, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for letting us shed some light on this. It's a great time.
Great. And for listeners out there, if you want to listen to this show again, it'll be on our website, Biz Talk with Score, in a week or so. You can also find it on podcast catchers over time. And we really do appreciate you listening in. Thanks again for listening to Biz Talk, and we'll talk to you next week.